Good evening.
Good evening.
Tara, thank you for being on the show.
Of course, thank you.
And this is the smoking section for people who are perhaps tuning in for the first time. I hope there are thousands of people tuning in, but however many, the show must go on, whether there are 2 or 200 or however many. And Tara McManus, and we met today. She is a recent graduate, a college graduate, and we met today at a talk by the former commissioner, actually, of the FDA. And is her name Margaret Hamburg, I think?
I believe so.
Margaret. And I was there because of my interest in tobacco. And what was your interest in the meeting today?
I was particularly interested to hear about a little bit of the sentencing for drugs and how, what her thoughts were on it, but really just general. The FDA's been on the news a lot for, the recent meat restrictions or that has escaped my notice.
Yeah. When you say it's been on the news recently, what does that mean recently?
Basically,
48 hours?
Yeah,
a week?
The past week, they're saying that the FDA really caved to lobbying pressures.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm not too educated on the subject, but I thought it could be interesting.
Regarding meat?
An interesting
regarding
Wednesday,
meat.
yeah, particularly with meat.
Is there some kind of issue regarding meat in the last few, meat's a big subject.
Know. Yeah.
Well, it was interesting because, you tend to cut these people a lot of slack. It's a big organization. I think she says when she was there were 12,000 employees, and I don't remember what the funding for it is, but billions, so, and it covers, so I don't know. You were a little disappointed. Tell me why you were disappointed.
I guess as a recent college graduate, I've been used to the lectures where there's a lot of meat, a lot of substance.
A lot of meat, right.
And,
okay.
And I felt that this kind of lacked that. I felt that she was kind of very surface level on all the issues, trying to appease her audience. And, she just stepped out of the job, so I thought she would have no agenda. But it seemed as though she was still trying to serve her own interests or the interests of protecting the face of the FDA.
The FDA, well, do you have do you have a negative view of the FDA?
I don't know if I have a view. Still working on it.
You're okay.
Still creating it, still learning.
And what was the question that you asked? Can you repeat it? I noticed you used a notebook.
Yes.
But you seem to be pretty comfortable asking a question. Were you at all nervous when you asked the question?
I was nervous. I didn't plan on asking a question when I went in, but I was no, not at all.
Yeah.
But I was kind of getting frustrated by the lack of substance, so I figured I would ask a question and try to push her back on it, but the answer was so dry, in my opinion, that it wasn't really worth it.
Well, essentially what she said was that the scheduling of drugs is a DEA thing. Mm-hmm. I guess she's talking about, prescription drugs or something like that for the most part, or illegal drugs, and that the FDA only advises.
Yes.
But
I think that can be a pretty powerful role to play.
Yes, and it was pretty interesting to me that, like I think you said, that marijuana is a Schedule I drug.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's up there with heroin, ecstasy, peyote as this Schedule I drug, meaning there's very little research money that can go into it because it's seen as having zero medical benefits. And then Schedule II, you get down to the oxycodone, the cocaine, the Vicodin.
That's Schedule II.
Yes, so that's seen as less dangerous.
Really, right.
Like Schedule I.
Which is, in this case, pretty absurd.
Yes. And so she was talking a little bit about the overdose and overuse of prescription, what's the word I'm looking for?
Opioids.
Opiates, yeah, opioids. And so I wanted to push back a little bit, and she was asking, about explaining how they needed to find better solutions for this opiate crisis, and I wanted to recommend that changing the scheduling and really looking at that critically is a good way to do so.
Right, and one thing that I was, my question to her, do you remember what my question to her was?
Yes, generally. You were asking about whether there was preservatives or...
No, I don't know if you're familiar. Well, the tobacco,
Not
in
very
2009, the FDA took jurisdiction of tobacco,
Okay.
which the FDA was originally formulated and was given authorization to cover medicines and food.
Mm-hmm.
And since tobacco was neither a medicine nor food, there weren't claims made for tobacco that it could, cure baldness or,
Right.
Cure the common cold, for example. And so the FDA has kind of wanted jurisdiction over it. So it got it in 2009. Well, recently, I mean, and this was a huge, huge event for the FDA. I mean, expanding their power tremendously.
Okay.
Because tobacco is, a widely used drug. Or let me take that back. I don't like to use that term in reference to tobacco, but it's widely used. Mm-hmm. And recently, the FDA has sent a letter to the American Spirit Tobacco Company demanding that they take off of their packaging that American Spirit has no additives.
And that's been a major branding point for American
Well, right,
Spirit.
exactly. I mean, that's their whole appeal. So
Right.
essentially it's saying to them, forget about it.
Yeah.
Right. So you're familiar with the American Spirit cigarettes?
A little bit. I actually studied the American Spirit ads in one of my classes. So as a
really? Well,
non-smoker,
come on,
it's pretty much the only...
Wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
What-
We were learning about how basically with tobacco, trying to align it with the younger generation, very eco-friendly, and that's the way that they're trying to target smokers.
Right. So, what class was this?
It was actually an English class on rhetoric.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Wow, that's a stretch, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Really. And tell me a little bit about what you learned about American Spirit and their advertising campaign, I guess we're talking about.
Not too much, other than the fact that they're trying to make it eco-friendly, trying to hide maybe the negative aspects of tobacco in order to bolster the fact that it is trying to be eco-friendly with the packaging and things like that.
Right, right. So was a lot of time devoted to this in your English class?
No, probably about 15 minutes.
15 minutes, ha. Well, so basically you got a really kind of biased view of...
Yes, surely.
You actually feel that it's a biased view. That it was kind of these very, let's say, sneaky American Spirit Tobacco Company trying to foist something off on unsuspecting youth. I mean, that's kind of the message I'm getting that you were given?
That's definitely the message I was given, and I haven't thought much about it or really critically thought about it. So I think with any piece of information you're given, you have to take it not for face value and really think about it and yourself, internalize, attach your beliefs to it, and see, where you align on the issue. So.
Well, I mean, you were given that by your professor,
Yes.
presumably.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, your professor was a male or a female?
Female.
Now, you have a little smile on your face. What?
I just thought it was, no.
No, okay. Well, I mean, it just seems like your professor was not allowing you to think critically, but was kind of giving you something, well, here's the way it is.
Perhaps.
But I'm kind of, I find that interesting. But, so what the FDA is saying is that you can't tell people it's additive free, even if it is additive free. And presumably, the reason for that is because the FDA is claiming that by claiming it's additive free, you are misguiding the American public to think that it might be safer than non-additive free tobacco.
Right.
And essentially that's kind of saying, well, I mean, that's kind of a First Amendment issue, right?
Which we talked a lot about today.
Yeah, I mean, that was interesting.
Yeah, that was fascinating to me.
That, you know, how the first, well, and what was fascinating, and you elaborate a little on what you just, on how the First Amendment got involved in today's discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, because elaborate a little on that if you could.
Yeah. Well, basically, she was explaining how, as scientists are researching a certain drug or researching a certain medicine, they're not allowed to speak to the medicine, even if the doctors are at the time prescribing the medicines
Right,
and allowing
right.
to prescribe them freely. And the discrepancy there and how that doesn't make too much sense. And that was entirely new to me, so I found that pretty fascinating.
And there was that fellow who came in there and said that the FDA actually arrested some scientist from a particular pharmaceutical company because he spoke at a panel meeting about, truthfully, but it nonetheless violated FDA regulations.
Right.
And he was, according to him, he was arrested and put in jail.
Yeah.
And I spoke to him after the event, and he said that this was reported in the
Yeah, he said the New York Times, the Washington Post.
Washington Post.
Yeah.
So she wasn't aware of it. I don't know, but that's a hope. So the FDA is saying that, well, this will mislead the American public.
Okay.
Now, I mean, that first of all is a little patronizing of the public, isn't it? I mean, shouldn't the public decide whether they want an additive-free tobacco product or not? And shouldn't they be the ones? Does the FDA really need to go so far as to say you can't describe your product as being additive-free, even if it is additive-free? I mean,
Right.
what do you think in terms of First Amendment, in terms of how paternalistic the FDA should be?
I think that it can be seen as a bit misleading
Mm-hmm.
for there to be no additives, especially if you get a younger kid who's never really smoked before and they see this additive free as probably healthier, and
Yeah.
so they're willing to pick up the American Spirit, and I don't know if it's honestly healthier or not, so, but I do think that people should have the right to choose for themselves.
And it should be, well, I mean, this gets then to the GMO thing. Like, there are a
Okay.
lot of members of the public who feel that they want to know if food is genetically modified.
Well, I guess what are the additives that are in the other tobacco products?
Oh, in the other tobacco products. Well, I mean, for years, the anti-smoking organizations were saying that the tobacco companies put a lot of terrible additives in their tobacco products. And then when American Spirit, and actually I think Winston also came along and said this is additive free, then the anti-smoking group said, don't let them fool you. Being additive free doesn't mean it's any better. This was for after years of accusing them
Right.
of adding terrible things to the tobacco products. So then when presumably, according to them, it wasn't good to add those things. But then when companies stopped adding them, they said, oh, it doesn't make any difference.
Okay.
So then I asked her also if she was aware of any study of additive-free tobacco, which, being that she was from the NIH before the FDA, I think, I thought she might be able to respond to, but she just simply said that she didn't know anything about what I was talking about.
Yeah.
Well, which is understandable because it's, I talked to her a little after it, and she said, well, she was after she'd left the FDA. So, I mean, and I don't think what I'm talking about, this letter that the FDA has sent to American Spirit has gotten a tremendous amount of attention.
Okay.
It's one of those things. So tell me a little bit more about incarceration in this is something you actually concentrated on then.
Yes, so I studied sociology and political science, but starting my sophomore year, I took a class where I was facilitating creative writing and theater workshops in both juvenile and adult male facilities,
Yeah.
correctional facilities, and rehabilitation a little bit regarding the juveniles. And so I really took that up my sophomore year, and luckily had 2 years to really study it. And that's what I've been doing, and that's what I intend to keep doing.
And have you been to correctional institutions?
Yes, so I was facilitating theater and creative writing in, I've done now 3 adult correctional and facilities and about 4 juvenile facilities.
And was that did you find that to be were the your clients, as you might call them, I don't know, what do you call them, the prisoners?
Yeah, workshop members.
Workshop members.
Yeah.
Were they enthusiastic?
Yes, it totally rocked my worldview when I got in there. I assumed one thing and experienced a completely different thing. They were the most respectful.
Yes, right.
Truly, and really well educated, even
Really?
if they had
Isn't
taken
that
it
so?
upon themselves to use the slim resources that they have in the prison library and really spend their days educating themselves. You know, the biblical references they would use, the references to, when I said I was a sociologist, to Foucault, Marx, all of these people. It was very impressive.
Weber.
And yeah, exactly. And a lot of times I was feeling like I was learning way more from them than I was actually teaching.
You didn't find it creepy to be in a prison?
Not at all. I felt always very comfortable, very
I
respected.
don't mean creepy with the people, but just the
Yeah.
fact that you're in, that you can't get out.
It's a weird place. It's really, because, they create lives for themselves. They have their nightly activities of basketball or going to these workshops. They can have jobs during the day. So it is this self-sustaining society in a way, and
Yes.
yet it's the power dynamics between the corrections officers and the inmates is just so vast. It's creepy.
But it's not. You don't think with these conditions? Do you think brutal?
It depends where you go. I had some places, and I find that it trickles down from the warden. If the warden really respects the
Is that right?
prisoners as human beings, then the activities directors feel the same way, and they try to get as much activity and interaction with the outside as possible. Whereas, in some of these towns where the prison has been the only industry for years and years,
Right.
the corrections officers, the wardens, are kind of hardened to think of the inmates as these non-human people who will always continue to make mistakes.
Recidivists, chronic recidivists.
Yes, and never really take the steps to actually rehabilitate or educate or enlighten the prisoners in any way.
Well, that brings me to the Geneva Convention. You know the Geneva Convention, is that something that rings a bell in your mind?
Yes.
It had to do with prisoners of war, agreements that were made regarding war and treatment of prisoners.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the agreements was always that they could not be denied tobacco. And I assume the prison facilities you were in, were they non-smoking?
I'm not sure, actually. That's something I don't know.
Because in a lot of, at one time, tobacco always helps people pass the time, and it kind of
Right.
eases people's irritations with one another and that kind of thing. But with the anti-smoking movement sweeping the globe, as it were, a lot of prisons have forbidden the prisoners from smoking cigarettes or pipes or cigars or anything like that. And it's led to some problems, and it also seems to me to be maybe cruel and unusual punishment.
Yeah. I'm sure that formally there's laws prohibiting tobacco in prisons, but that doesn't mean that everyone's finding a way around it.
But not everyone.
Yeah.
Nor that some aren't.
Yes.
Yeah, and what, just, as a person, you seem pretty open-minded and whatnot. Do you find it odd that there is so much a move to, let's say, legitimize marijuana use either medically or non-medically, whereas at the same time, more and more restrictions and what I call predatory taxes are being put upon tobacco?
In my mind, there's a vast difference between marijuana and tobacco, just in terms of the health side effects and things like that. And so I, one, have a problem with differentiating between medical marijuana and everyday marijuana, because it's all the same. It's coming from the same place, essentially.
Yes.
And there's no material difference between the two.
Between medical marijuana and recreational marijuana.
Yes.
Well, your father, who I'm sorry to say passed away from cancer, how did he use marijuana?
He used it very slim, because I think he was trusting his doctors that are pushing all of these prescriptions, medicines on him, and not as inclined to prescribe him marijuana. So he did one time, he was taking prescription synthetic marijuana, and the difference I saw in him in that one day was truly amazing.
Is
He
that
was
right?
talking, he was hungry, he was engaged. You know, he made a comment about how his mind feels a little funny, and because his mind felt funny, he didn't want to continue. But in fact, all the other drugs he was using, he would have,
I've got to cut you off.
Okay,
Thank you for watching the Smoking Section.
thank you. So fast.